Welcome to another Discovery Bible class. Pastor Ron and Mary are on holidays. I am Wilf Kazmaier, and I will be your speaker today. I've entitled today's talk, Run the Race, and it is based on the Bible passage we find in Hebrews chapter 12, 1 through 2. Let me read you this passage by way of introduction. Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of faith. You know, it's beneficial when studying a Bible passage to read the passage in context, and this is true of today's passage. Did you note we begin with therefore? And if you see the word therefore, you should always find what the therefore is there for. In this case, the context of our passage is the chapter preceding it, chapter 11 of Hebrews, which is a list of many of the people of faith found in the Old Testament. Now, lists can be very interesting. Time magazine has produced a very interesting list in their annual editions, which are known as the Person of the Year. The Person of the Year edition is featuring a person, a group, or an idea that, for better or worse, has done the most to influence the events of the year. The first Person of the Year was awarded in the year 1927 to Charles Lindbergh in recognition of his solo flight from New York to Paris. They gave it to Lindbergh on the 2nd of January 1928 in an attempt to correct a huge mistake that Time magazine had made. You see, when 25-year-old Lindbergh landed in Paris, the people of the world recognized that this was a tremendous achievement. Everywhere he went, he met huge crowds and received great honors. But the editors of Time magazine had largely ignored the Lindbergh story, and at the end of the year, they realized that they had missed the most important event of 1927. So to fix this, they put Lindbergh's picture on the cover of the magazine and devoted an entire issue to his great success. This worked so well that they decided to award a Person of the Year ever since. Now, in the 96 issues of Person of the Year that Time magazine gave out, as you might expect, 23 times it was given to the President of the United States. You'll recognize many of the names. Franklin Roosevelt won it 3 times. John F. Kennedy won it in 1963. Richard Nixon won it. Ronald Reagan won it, and so on. In 2016, they gave the Person of the Year to Donald Trump. And just to be bipartisan, they gave it to Joe Biden in 2020. 21 other times it was awarded to other world leaders. And most recently, in 2021, they gave it to Elon Musk, and last year to Volodymyr Zelensky and all the people of the Ukraine for their indomitable spirit. There were some interesting exceptions. In 1950, it was given to the American soldier. Were you alive in 1966? Then you won the award because it was given to all the baby boomers who were children at the time. It was predicted that this generation would have a marked impact on the world, and indeed they did. And in 1982, it was given not to a person, but to the Machine of the Year, to the computer, which makes sense. Time magazine came up with another list. They decided to find the Person of the Century. They went back 1,000 years and picked 10 names, one for each century, that had dramatically influenced their time period. It is an interesting list. From the year 1000 to 1100, that's the 11th century, they gave it to William the Conqueror. The 12th century honor went to Saladin. He's the Muslim sultan who defeated the Crusaders in Palestine. The 13th century honor went to Genghis Khan. Excuse me. It seems that if you want to win this award, you have to be the head of a huge army and reap destruction on all parts of the world. But there are exceptions. The 15th century went to Johannes Gutenberg, the inventor of the printing press. The 16th to Elizabeth I, and the 17th to the scientist Isaac Newton. The last century, the 20th century, also went to a scientist, Albert Einstein. Now God also has his own person of the year and person of the century. And we find part of his list in chapter 11 of Hebrews. God's list makes an interesting contrast to the ones that the people of time and the world honor. It covers a much broader time period. It begins from the very beginning of human history, so over thousands of years. The first name mentioned in the list found in Hebrews is Abel. It says Abel did things right, unlike his brother Cain. The second name was Enoch. We find the name of Enoch in one of those long lists of names of patriarchs. You know the ones, so-and-so begot so-and-so begot so-and-so. They pause in the middle of one of these long lists, and it says, and Enoch walked faithfully with God, and then was no more. Hebrews 11 elaborates on Enoch. It said Enoch was commended above all those others as one who pleased God. And then it says, and without faith it is impossible to please God, because anyone who comes to him must believe that he exists and that he rewards those who earnestly seek him. So here we see the criteria for making it on God's list. You have to be a person of faith, and it clearly defines faith. You must believe God exists, that he's a good God, and therefore you are earnestly seeking him. Now we have lots of examples in the Bible of people who were people of faith. A few hundred years after Enoch, we find Joseph. If you have been following our Discovery Bible class, then you know an awful lot about Joseph, because Pastor Ron did a whole series on his life. In brief, Joseph was sold by his brothers into slavery. And as a slave, he continued to seek and walk with God, and God blessed him. But then he was falsely accused of attempted rape and was sent to prison. In prison, he continued to walk with God and was blessed. Then he became Prime Minister of Egypt. And in that capacity, he saved his own family from starvation, and also, in the process, saved the entire known world of starvation as well. Now, Time magazine certainly would have named Joseph the person of the year when he was Prime Minister. But God already had him on his list well before that, when he was a slave and he was in prison. Hebrews 11 goes on through many, many other names that you are probably familiar with. And it ends with the Old Testament. But God's list of the heroes of the faith goes well beyond the Old Testament. For instance, it contains the names of those people of faith who are honored in the New Testament. Take, for example, the year 4 BC. This is the year that scholars now say Jesus Christ was born. The editors of Time magazine, I'm sure, true to form, would probably have picked the Emperor Caesar Augustus as their person of the year. I mean, he is known for being the founder of the Roman Empire and is considered one of the most successful leaders in human history. But he's not God's choice for Person of the Year. Imagine pulling out the envelope that year at Time Magazine's offices. Let's see who God chose for Person of the Year. It's not the Emperor Caesar Augustus. Who is it? It's some young woman. She lives in the small rural town of Nazareth. She's engaged to some poor carpenter. Person of the Year? Who is this Mary that's on this name? What an unlikely candidate. But we see God announcing his choice, not by opening an envelope, by sending the angel Gabriel, who sees Mary and says, "Greetings, you who are highly favored. The Lord is with you." What an amazing announcement. Mary couldn't believe it. But she must have been a great woman of faith. You can see that by how she responds. When she hears God's plan for her, which is incredible, that she would be the mother of our Savior, she answered, "I am the Lord's servant. May your word to me be fulfilled." A woman of faith. I want to point out another person of faith we meet in the New Testament. We don't know his name, we just know him as the centurion. He was a military Roman leader, had 100 men under him. He'd be like a lieutenant or a captain in today's military. We're told in Matthew 8, starting in verse 5, when Jesus entered Capernaum, a centurion came to him asking for help. "Lord," he said, "my servant lies at home paralyzed and suffering terribly." Jesus said to him, "Shall I come and heal him?" And the centurion replied, "I do not deserve to have you come under my roof. Just say the word, and my servant will be healed." It says when Jesus heard this, he was amazed. You see, the centurion had recognized that Jesus was more than just a faith healer you would bring by to lay hands on whoever was sick. That Jesus was the God of the universe, and he doesn't have to come by. He just has to say the word, and it will be done. And that's what Jesus did. Jesus healed the servant from a distance. And he said he was amazed. In fact, he says that, "Truly I tell you, I have not found anyone in Israel with such great faith." Here was a man, not even a Jew, who recognized who Jesus was, sought his help when he needed him, and received a great reward for it. But I don't think the list of God's people of faith ends with the end of the New Testament. God is still looking for people of faith today. In fact, Hebrews 12 gives us this idea. Remember how it started? "Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us." Who's this cloud of witnesses? Well, it's all those names I've been talking about. The ones in Hebrews 11 in the Old Testament, the names we've seen in the New Testament, of which there are many more, and the names of people of faith from when the New Testament ended until the current day. Those generations have run their race, and the picture is they are in heaven watching us and cheering us on. They are a cloud of witnesses in the stands. But they have passed the baton on to us, and now it is our turn to run this race of faith. So how will we run this race well? How will we be a good example of faith to our generation, and to our children, and to our grandchildren? Well, one encouraging thing about faith is you don't need to have a lot of it to start with. You can have faith like a mustard seed, And if you take care of it, it will grow. How can you grow your faith? Well, here's one story that I've always found helpful. It is the illustration of the unjust judge. It's a parable that Jesus tells in Luke 18, starting in verses 5 through 8. The story is told of someone who was an unjust judge, and that's kind of an interesting phrase. You would expect people you appoint to be justices to be just. But then there are political appointments, so I guess once in a while we'll get a judge who's unjust. Anyway, he admits he's an unjust judge, but he has this case pending from a widow, and he basically ignores her. But the widow keeps pestering day in and day out that he finally says, I've had enough. I'm not going to give her what she wants because I'm a just judge. I'm just going to do it so that I have a bit of peace and quiet. And then Jesus makes this analogy. He says, "And will not God bring about justice for his chosen ones, who cry out to him day and night? Will he keep putting them off? I tell you, he will see that they get justice, and quickly." Well, if the unjust judge responds to pestering, certainly a good God will listen to you, and Jesus says, you'll get your justice and you'll get it quickly. But then Jesus asks this very interesting question. However, when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on the earth? I think what he's saying is, if you take Jesus up on his offer, if you find yourself in some difficult circumstance, and you believe there is a God who cares about you, what will you do? Will you not cry out to him day and night? Will you not persevere in your prayers and wrestle with God? And what will you find? Jesus says, God will answer your prayer, and by his time frame, answer it quickly. What will happen to your faith when you get such an answer? I think it will grow. But if you don't take Jesus up on his offer and you never seek him in prayer, then I guess your faith won't grow. So to his interesting question, when I come back, will I find faith on the earth? Think about it. He may come back in the year 2023, this year. He may come back to take us all to heaven, or he may just come back for you. It's a distinct possibility. Will there be a person of faith this year, 2023? Well, the answer is up to us. We're the ones with the baton now. We're the ones running the race. We're the ones who must believe that God exists and seek him earnestly. So may I suggest that you bring your request boldly before God this year and see if he will work in our lives? Will Jesus find a large measure of faith in our lives? Only if we make the effort to ask and seek and knock on heaven's door. There's a second piece of advice that I would give you. It comes from Hebrews 12. Let me read on. It says, we must run this race and fix our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of faith, who for the joy set before him endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured such opposition from sinners, so that you will not grow weary or lose heart. Besides all the names of people of faith that I've mentioned today, which are a good example, the best example, Hebrews tells us, is Jesus himself. See how he ran his race, right to the very end. See how he endured opposition, so that we will not grow weary and lose heart in our race. You see, it's a fundamental mistake if you're running a race to look back. If you get distracted by what's on either side of you, it'll slow you down. And worst of all, if you turn around to see if you're winning, and this has happened before, you will not only lose speed, but you're liable to trip and not finish. It's important when running a race to look directly at where you're going and see that goal and keep your eyes fixed on it. And that's what Hebrews tells us to do. As we run our race, as we live our lives of faith, we need to continue to focus on Jesus so that we run well. I would like to close my time with you today by reading another poem by Annie Johnson Flint. I've done these before. She's written one that tells us about keeping our eyes on Jesus. Annie Johnson Flint was the hymn writer and poet of the last century, and she wrote one poem saying, "I see Jesus." Let me close by reading it to you. She says, "I don't look back. God knows the fruitless efforts, the wasted hours of sinning, the regrets. I leave them all with Him who blots the record and mercifully forgives and then forgets. I don't look forward. God sees all the future. The road that, short or long, will lead me home. And He will face with me its every trial and bear for me the burdens that may come. I don't look around me. Then would fears assail, so wild the tumult of earth's restless seas, so dark the world, so filled with woe and evil, so vain the hope of comfort and of ease. I don't look in, for then am I most wretched. Myself has naught on which to stay my trust. Nothing I see save failures and shortcomings, and weak endeavors crumbling into dust. But I look up into the face of Jesus, for there my heart can rest. My fears are stilled, and there is joy and love and light for darkness and perfect peace and every hope fulfilled." May God bless you as you run your race of faith, and may we see you again here at the Discovery Bible class. Thank you.